Back in 1992, I was visiting the lovely state of Michigan for a close family friend's wedding. It was summer, and everything is incredibly lush and full of life. The wedding went by, and we got to the best part, the reception, where many drank and partied far into the night. I had struggled with alcohol a lot growing up, so I was one of the only few sober individuals there at the time, besides some other apostolic elders who were pretty anti-alcohol and drinking altogether. People were starting to leave and head home when, clear as day, we all heard the most disturbing, loud howl yell. It was so loud that you could feel the vibrations from it in your chest and ears. It hurt that it was so loud. This got everyone's attention, and we all looked over in the direction that it came from, which was the heavily forested area just beyond the reception area outside. Many started looking panicked and confused, not knowing what the sound was or where exactly it came from. People started whispering and talking in hushed, panicked tones. It didn't quite sound like a human, but had a quality to it that sounded remotely human, just much more visceral. It was like mixing a wolf howl with a person yelling, and making that very guttural. My friend, the groomsman, and his newly bride, the color had drained from their faces completely. I knew then that what we all heard wasn't normal. We weren't crazy. We knew it. There was easily still 60 people minimum at this reception at the time. For those that were drinking, I bet it sobered them up real quick. I still think about this happening, and it gives me the shivers. I've grown up in areas where I've heard wolves howl, and I've heard coyotes plenty of times. This didn't sound like either. Wolves and coyotes don't also have that guttural quality to it, like this did. The volume alone was unnatural, and the size of the animal would have to be immensely large for it to have that kind of volume. I can only imagine the lung size of whatever animal made this howl. I got a really interesting story for you. So interesting that in fact, I honestly thought I was having a joke played on me at the time. This happened back in the early 1980s, when at the time, I was fishing at a secret location on a creek that only I really knew about. This was in northern Michigan, so funny enough at the time, I had just seen the movie American Werewolf in London, like a week or two prior before this happened. This is the major proponent to why I believe, or believed at the time, that I was being pranked. I got to my fishing spot very early, right about sunrise, and spent the better half of the entire day there. It was probably about lunchtime, because I had just gotten done eating a turkey sandwich, and the sun was directly overhead. I noticed some movement coming across the embankment that caught my eye. At first, it was the brush and bushes moving around, but then there became more and more movement. This led me to believe that it was a larger animal, maybe a bear, since I know there are bears up here. I've just never seen one in the flesh. Now I started paying a lot more attention to the movement than I did my line in the water. Then I saw it. 2 long cropped ears. Then the entire head and the upper body popped up out of the brush, looking down to the west at something. I was caught in a state of surprise at what I was looking at. This looked to be somebody in an elaborate werewolf costume. I kind of chuckled to myself, thinking, wow, one of my friends must have gone to great lengths to follow me here secretly, getting into a suit to try and scare me. But there were just some things that didn't fully line up with that way of thinking. This animal was intently looking down at something behind the bushes that I just could not see. Then I saw it crouch down again, with the only tops of its ears poking out. After about a few more minutes, or seconds, I don't remember, it fully stood up, looking still and looking down. Its focus was intent on something. At the time, I don't think I was buying it, and I thought it was still one of my friends, and they were waiting for the perfect opportune moment to try and scare me. So I entirely dropped my rod, stood up, and yelled out to this thing that I thought was my friend at the time. "Hey, asshole!" and as quick as you can snap your fingers, this thing turned its head, looked right at me. It stared at me for about a second or two. Very curious expression on its face before jumping 20 feet in the air into the tree line and disappeared. My jaw about dropped to the ground. In that moment, my pants became 20 pounds heavier, and I should have brought a new pair of jeans with me. That, my friends, was a tough pill to swallow. I had seen a real living animal that resembled that of a werewolf. What are the odds of that happening just a couple of weeks after I saw a werewolf movie? I packed my things up and I left in fear that this thing would return, possibly with more of them. I kept trying to tell myself, no, this isn't possible. These things don't exist. I was just seeing things and I was just having a joke played on me. No man in a werewolf costume, I don't care how big or small, can jump 20 feet up in the air and into the trees like this thing did, at the speed that it did. It was completely unnatural. I don't know if dogmen or werewolves truly exist, but I do know for sure that there are unknown animals out there living among us. When I was a little boy, my father acquired a rather large property from an older gentleman who used to trophy hunt a lot in his younger days. Along with the property, he was giving my father all of his prized trophies that came with it, because he was getting older, much older, and got tired of lugging them all around with him, and really wanted to start minimalizing his living. He just wanted to find the right tenant who would appreciate all of his years of love and labor. As a little boy, I do remember all of the trophies. Everything from large exotic bison, bucks, African exotic animals, alligators, I can go on and on. Things that would make you squirm. Then, he had a whole room dedicated to skulls that he had found during his time hunting. The one that I wanted to talk to you about was this colossal-sized canine skull that had far oversized canines. The other unorthodox part of the skull is that all the teeth besides the canines were like needle pins, razor sharp, and even with the aging and wear and tear of the skull, they were still very much intact and sharp as ever. The skull was larger than a cow skull, and my dad, nor the older gentleman who sold him the place, really knew where it came from. He had forgotten the location that he found it in, but thinks it was up in the Rocky Mountains, if he remembered correctly. Growing up, I always thought it could have been a dire wolf skull, but the teeth never made sense to me. Isn't a dire wolf just a larger version of a wolf? I don't think they had exaggerated canines or razor-bladed teeth. This thing didn't even have molars, just razor teeth. It was not until my later 20s that I got into cryptozoology that I started to realize that maybe that the skull was from something much more. Well, my father sold everything in that house and then sold the property a while back, so we lost all ownership of everything that was there. To this very day, I kick myself for not taking that skull, but it surely was incredible. I might just be overplaying it here, and hyping up the issue when there's nothing really there. I can't guarantee that this was a Dogman skull, but in my heart of hearts, that's what I want to believe. It doesn't match up with any other known canine skull that I've ever seen, and the size alone was abnormally large. I believe these creatures are really out there, but I've never seen one. Maybe whoever acquired that skull and the property has a potential connection and one foot in the door to actually proving these things do exist. There might still be DNA on that thing, and maybe, just maybe, I could track down whoever bought the property. I've already submitted my encounter to several other big YouTubers like Swamp Dweller, Darkness Prevails, and that's just to name a couple, and I wanted to share it with you. I'm almost certain that there is a dogman, or a small pack of dogmen, living out by where I live. There is a large field that is empty along the main road that I drive to leave this area. It's probably about 15 acres of just large field with no development on it, filled to the brim with tall grass and even a small pond. I believe it's full of rabbits. We see them all over the place. Every spring and summer, they are everywhere. They're constantly dead on the side of the road, and I'm always seeing them hopping around. That's not counting all the other little animals we have, like possums, skunks, raccoons, all your typical little American animals that live out here in the boonies. I truly believe that I have seen several of these Dogman creatures. I've had several sightings, and it's usually all in the early morning or evening time when it's dusky outside. They resemble very closely a German Shepherd with very pointy ears, walking around on two legs. I've never seen them running, only walking, but they are out visible in the field without a care in the world to whoever drives by and sees them. I know the road that it's close to isn't necessarily a busy road, but people still go up and down it. I'm sure I'm not the only person to have witnessed what I have, and I firmly believe that they are Dogmen. The only time I've ever seen more than one was in the early morning a few weeks back when I saw a really tall one, and then a smaller one next to it following after. They're always headed in the opposite direction that I'm in, or they seem like they're headed back into the woods. I don't know if they are here seasonally or if they're here for food, because I know with all the rabbits around, there is plenty to eat. There's almost like an infestation of rabbits. I've never gone adventuring into that empty, undeveloped land, so I don't know how many hollows and little dens there are full of rabbits, but I'm sure it's plentiful if there's that many Dogmen around. From what I know, the woods surrounding that undeveloped plot of land are state game land or state-owned, and it goes on for miles and miles, up against several of the rolling hills and mountains behind us. I'm not sure if anybody really lives back there, or there's really any other property development, but to my knowledge, there is not. This would equip a Dogman with plenty of places to hide and thrive, without ever being discovered by a human. A little too close to home if you ask me, but I've never seen or had any issues with them around my house. Now that I think about it, I'm honestly surprised because I have quite a few cherry trees, apple trees, apricot trees, and even pear trees, and I know they are generally attracted to those things, or maybe just attracted to what kind of prey those things bring. You wouldn't even begin to believe the high amounts of deer and other animals those trees pull in, and that means my property is probably just a ticking time bomb to be pulling these creatures in. I fear that once the rabbits and other small animals have been eaten up, these creatures will move on. I only live right up the road, a couple of miles, which is practically a stone's throw away for these things. I do feel fortunate that I am very well versed and knowledgeable about cryptids and Dogman, especially that I feel equipped to deal with the situation if it ever does arise. I have plenty of firepower, and I could even put bars on my windows if needed. I've heard too many horror stories of people dealing with these things who don't expect it, and I refuse to be a statistic who is found dead, or my body is missing, and only blood to be found. I will fight to the death if I have to, but for now, I'm just going to keep my distance and respect that they are here, in hopes they will never find me and leave me alone.